Fonterra is looking to sell off some of its businesses.
The dairy co-op's looking at full or partial divestment options for Fonterra Oceania, which runs brands like Mainland and Anchor, and also Fonterra Sri Lanka. The sale would include 17 manufacturing sites, 3 of which are here in Aotearoa. Chief Executive Miles Hurrell says they've already had interest from potential buyers.
While these are great businesses, ownership of them is not required to fulfil Fonterra's core function of collection, processing and selling of milk. We believe prioritising our ingredient and food service channels and releasing capital in our consumer and associated businesses would generate more value.
Lots of changes in the labour market too, with changes to work visas causing headaches for primary producers.
Yes, the country's wine growers are concerned that changes to the Accredited Employer Work Visa scheme will impact their workforce and therefore future harvests. Last month, in efforts to tighten immigration, the government made a raft of changes to the scheme, including increasing requirements for those applying for low-skilled jobs especially, like meeting basic English language requirements. Nicola Crennan of New Zealand Wine Growers told the Primary Production Select Committee they're an industry which relies heavily on those vital extra hands during busy harvest seasons.
That visa is largely used by our industry to bring in international workers for a short period of time for vintage. The changes in the conditions mean that those vintage workers are seen as the lower skilled workforce, and so that means there's going to be some extra hoops for them to jump through.
Meanwhile, there's close to 1,500 Ni Vanuatu recognised seasonal employer workers stranded in New Zealand.
Well, there's no easy way for them to get home after Air Vanuatu went into voluntary liquidation. Many of their visas were soon to expire, and Immigration New Zealand says it's working on the problem. 80 RSE workers from Vanuatu are working on the Thomas Brothers orchards in Riwaka. Manager Steve Thomas says 30 are due to head home at the end of the month.
So we have human resources and pastoral care managers, and they are back and forth with travel agents trying to find other carriers to get back into Port Vila and different routes. And they're also just working through with immigration to try and see if they can get extensions to their visas.
And beekeepers say New Zealand needs a new approach to the American foulbrood disease.
Yes, honey producer Springbank Honey was ordered to burn more than 10,000 of its beehives and some equipment after the disease was found through spore testing. American foulbrood is spread by spores that can be viable for up to 40 years, and it's one of the most widespread and destructive diseases affecting honeybees. Stephen Brown of Springbank Honey says New Zealand needs to change its approach to managing the disease and instead use tools like vaccines or antibiotics, as some other countries do. He says destruction of the hives is going to cost them millions.
The notice to burn all our honey seekers, that has absolutely been devastating. They made us burn over 10,000 boxes. Next year, when we don't have boxes for our honey crop, we're probably going to be losing over $5 to $6 million. Like, the loss of the boxes is one thing, but without the boxes to go on the hives, we won't have a honey crop. The money to replace this, there's no compensation.
We also spoke with Apiculture New Zealand's Chief Executive, Karen Koss. She says vaccines aren't approved yet in markets like the US, and the use of antibiotics would threaten export market access.
The last thing beekeepers want to get is AFB in their hives, but it is a community effort to stop the prevention and spread of AFB. So it's a tricky issue to deal with, but as a beekeeping community, there is absolute support for managing AFB as well as we can.
Now, Monique, you have an update on the Zespri kiwi fruit shipment that was infested with mice.
Yes, Zespri says 1.2 million trays of kiwi fruit on the ship docked in Belgium will be destroyed, with the total cost of the kiwi fruit and getting rid of it at about $34 million. The kiwi fruit marketer says since mice were discovered on the ship last month, it's tried sorting through the fruit to salvage as much as possible. But it abandoned that due to reputational and food safety concerns. The disposed fruit will now be turned into biofuel.
Across the Tasman now, Monique, and Australia's announced a phase-out of live sheep exports by sea.
Yes, the federal government's decided to phase out the trade over the next 4 years. National Farmers Federation President David Johinke says around 800,000 head of sheep, mostly from Western Australia, they're sent to the Middle East each year, its largest market, and the trade is worth around $123 million. He says processing plants would struggle to take any more product that's being diverted from live export.
We are struggling to maintain or process the amount of sheep already going through those facilities. Means that essentially a lot of farmers will get out of sheep. They will then obviously reduce the amount of wool being processed or shorn within Australia, and we'll see a turn to probably more monoculture, broadacre cropping as an alternative.
Meanwhile, here in New Zealand, the coalition government is planning to reverse a ban on live animal exports by sea, but the government says it would go out for public consultation first.
And lastly, an update on a company we've been following for a while here at Country Life, Daisy Lab. They're involved in this possibly game-changing technology creating dairy-style products without the need for a cow. What's the latest?
This is the company which has been experimenting with technology known as precision fermentation. It's now been granted approval from the Environmental Protection Authority to scale up its production. Daisy Lab's founders say it's a critical step towards commercialising the animal-free dairy proteins to supply to food and beverage companies.
Watch this space. Thanks, Monique.